Hello and welcome to Roots and Roots, the podcast where we talk about your favorite trails and our favorite things about them. Today we're sharing some interesting facts about the Kentville Ravine Trail and how it's shaped by the status of one of the Wabanaki Forest's most beloved trees, the Eastern Hemlock, also known as Gastuk. Nice to meet you. My name is Lauren.
And my name is Lucy. And you're listening to Roots and Roots, brought to you by the Town of Kentville Recreation Department.
We would like to begin this series by acknowledging that we live, play, work, and learn on the ancestral, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The land that settlers now call the Annapolis Valley has supported and been supported in turn for thousands of years by the Mi'kmaq people since time immemorial. Nova Scotia and the Maritime Provinces, along with parts of Quebec, are governed by the treaties of peace and friendship, first signed in 1726 between the British Crown and the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples. Each of these sovereign nations hold inherent rights under these treaties and the 1982 Constitution Act. We are all treaty people, and we are all responsible for the stewardship of the land, as we are each individually responsible to deeply engage and move forward in the work of truth and reconciliation. Without action, this acknowledgement is empty, and it marks merely the beginning of the work ahead.
We would also like to recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose individual and collective histories, legacies, and contributions have deeply enriched the part of Mi'kmaqi known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years. This founding culture has profoundly shaped our families and communities, and we recognize the impact of African Nova Scotians and their resistance, resilience, creativity, spirituality, and hope. Actively implementing strategies to address systemic, structural, and individual discrimination faced by African Nova Scotians over the short and long term is essential to creating communities where everyone has access to recreation opportunities.
I would also like to acknowledge the significant contributions made by the Acadian community in building the infrastructure and culture of this province. Between the original settlement in Grand Pre in 1680 and the Acadian deportation of 1755, Acadian farmers enclosed and drained over 1,000 acres of marshland, which created much of the superior cropland we are fortunate to eat from today in the Annapolis Valley. The Acadian people and their stories, language, culture, technology, and settlements shaped the cultural and physical landscape of the Maritimes. The Acadian pattern of land use was continued by English, Scottish, and Dutch settlers in the Annapolis Valley and other parts of the Maritimes. And these cultural histories shape our modern use and access to land for all purposes, including many of the local trails and parks we know and love. So, what are we talking about today? The Kentville Ravine Trail. So, the Kentville Ravine is a serene hiking trail nestled in between Highway 1 and Highway 101 in Kentville, Nova Scotia. The trail winds steeply across the southern bank of the ravine forged by Elderkin's Brook, which stretches along the floor of the ravine, and it climbs up to look over a small waterfall where the trail ends in a loop.
The ravine was first established as a recreational area by Saxby Blair, the first superintendent of the Agriculture Canada Research Station, way back in 1913, shortly after the research station was established in 1911. The trail has belonged and been managed by Agriculture Canada as a protected site since then, without many modifications until recent years. Core samples from selected hemlock trees from the 2000s revealed that the oldest trees in the ravine were saplings around 1757. Some people believe that the ravine might have been intentionally burned during or soon after the Acadian expulsion of 1755.
Though evidence is not conclusive, there are indications that a tidal mill existed upstream of the ravine, where a particular plant, the red fly honeysuckle, which was introduced to North America by the Acadians, was found. This, along with some structures discovered near the mouth of the brook, hint that there might have been some sort of structure related to water, like a wharf or a mill, although it could be of either Acadian or planter origin.
And if you weren't familiar, the New England planters are an ethnic group who emigrated from Britain to New England before American independence. After the Acadians were deported by the British Crown in 1755, the New England planters were offered free land and other benefits to settle the lands which the Acadians farmed. This was enticing to many second and third sons of settlers in New England, as opportunities to own land were becoming scarce in New England.
So since the establishment of the Ravine Trail as a recreational area, the research station has constructed 3 concrete bridges to facilitate a trail which now snakes on either side of the brook. The dense canopy of hemlocks, pines, beeches, and other trees provide a cool refuge next to the stream. Management of the Ravine Trail was recently signed over from the Federal Department of Agriculture to the town of Kentville in an easement signed in 2018 for the next 50 years. The town of Kentville will maintain this natural space and aims to increase access to the wonderful trail. And Lucy, did you know the ravine was just recently reopened?
And I did know that. It was officially closed to the public until April of this year. Why is that?
So there was a landslip that occurred in the park in February of 2022 during a severe weather event. And the trail was closed and rerouted, as was the brook. But now it's been almost completely restored. The trail is a little different than it used to be, and the lower area next to the lower parking lot has been closed. So make sure you come check it out.
And a big reason why we wanted to make this podcast episode was to talk about hemlock trees. The Kentville Ravine's tree stands are about 80% hemlock trees. They make up a huge portion of the park's old growth.
I love hemlock trees. They're so cool. Hemlock trees are conifers, which means they have needles and live in the winter. And they have a furrowed grayish-brownish bark and soft, short, flat needles. And they look very similar to balsam firs and are native to the Wabanaki-Acadian forest. Hemlock trees love to grow on shady slopes, so in many places like the ravine, the tree's roots are huge safeguards against erosion.
And did you know that hemlock trees are keystone species in the Wabanaki forest?
What's a keystone species?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. A keystone species is a species that is crucial to the function of an ecosystem. For example, wolves in Yellowstone Park were hunted because they were dangerous. So the deer population got a little out of control because the wolves weren't eating the deer. And then the deer were eating young trees and damaging the tree stands. Because there were less trees nearby the water, one of the rivers began eroding the banks and changing the landscape. When they reintroduced wolves in Yellowstone, many of those issues were reversed.
So hemlocks are also a keystone species?
Yeah, they are really important to the ecosystem of the Wabanaki forest, especially for temperature regulation and to provide shade in the forest. They also make up a huge portion of the remaining old growth in the Wabanaki forest.
Hemlock trees are also very tolerant to shade, meaning that seedlings can grow very well on the forest floor under the canopy of other trees, which allows the tree to populate an area for potentially thousands of years. An individual hemlock tree can grow up to 100 feet tall and over a meter in diameter, and it can live for more than 500 years.
That's a long time. Did you know hemlock trees create microclimates?
I didn't know that.
So, under the shade of the canopy of a hemlock stand, you will discover that the temperature, humidity, and of course light levels are different than the local average. The dense shade can reduce temperatures by as much as 10 degrees Celsius, while at the same time increasing the humidity. This can make huge impacts on fish populations by providing a cool, sheltered habitat for them to spawn in. They are nesting trees of choice for many birds, and in the ravine you might hear lots of the red-eye vireo and yellow warblers. The boughs of the hemlock tree also provide shelter for deer in the winter months, as the snow isn't as deep under their branches. And another interesting fact about fir trees is that when their needles fall to the forest floor, they make the soil acidic. This means that other kinds of plants may struggle to grow under large stands of conifers.
However, have you noticed that there's a lot of undergrowth in the ravine? What sort of plant species have you noticed on our trips to the ravine?
So I'm glad you asked. I've noticed a lot of lady slippers, a ton of ferns, in specific ostrich ferns, the ones you can use for fiddleheads, and grape ferns, mushrooms like turkey tail and pear-shaped puffball, and some lovely mosses and lichens.
If you're interested in identifying species on your nature walks, I would highly recommend downloading iNaturalist, which is an app where you can upload pictures of your finds and get help identifying them through the online community.
Another great app is Merlin by Cornell University. You record the bird sounds around, and the app will tell you which birds are in your area. If you're looking at these apps, you'll see a lot of citizen scientists have been uploading their finds around Kentville, especially in the ravine.
There's been a lot of buzz recently about a certain species in the Kentville Ravine affecting the hemlock trees.
And what species might that be?
The Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. It's a massive threat against hemlock trees in North America. The Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, also known as HWA, is a tiny aphid-like, soft-bodied insect that creates a layer of white wool to protect themselves as they grow. They feed from hemlock trees by attaching themselves to the soft tissues at the very base of the needle where it meets the branch. And then they rob the tree of nutrients and water, eventually infesting the tree until the entire tree withers and then dies. The trees have no natural defense against HWA, so the result of HWA's presence in Nova Scotia can be devastating, causing erosion, tree falls, the destruction of microclimates, and causing huge potential for forest fires.
And I've also heard that the insect scientifically named Adelgid's tsugae, arrived in Nova Scotia in 2017 in Yarmouth County and has been spreading north steadily since. It is native to the Pacific Northwest and Asia, where it has natural predators such as the Leucobius beetle, but the effect in eastern North America has been worrying because there are no native predators in our region.
The Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is only able to crawl for a short period of time before they become immobile and attach themselves to the bark of the tree for the rest of their lives. Initially, researchers believed that the spread would slow due to our colder winters, but due to climate change, the rate of contamination hasn't really slowed as much as they hoped.
The Adelgid attacks only the new growth of hemlock trees, starting at the very top of the canopy and slowly making its way down the tree. So by the time you see HWA at eye level, it's likely that the entire tree is infested.
So how can you find this insect if it's smaller than a grain of pepper? Well, first you need to find a hemlock tree. So, as we said, hemlock trees love to grow on shady slopes, and they have a furrowed grayish-brownish bark and soft, short, flat needles. The HWA leaves a woolly mass at the base of the needles and the underside of the hemlock branches. And the woolly mass is an egg sac which can contain up to 300 eggs. The HWA produces 2 generations in a year, meaning they can infest an area rapidly and leave the forest hurting. Since they prevent the tree from absorbing nutrients, you might notice an infested tree suffer from needle loss, a thinning upper crown and canopy, and overall twigs and branches begin to die back. HWA can kill a hemlock tree in 3 to 10 years, with more rapid mortality rates in areas of the province with mild winters, like Kentville.
And if you're looking for hemlock trees in Kentville, you'll notice that a lot of them have been tagged and wrapped with flagging tape. The town of Kentville has begun a multi-year project organizing staff and teams of volunteers to measure, tag, and treat hemlock trees in the gorge and ravine, supervised by qualified personnel from Medway Community Forest Cooperative, Acadia University, and other non-government organizations. They've hired an intern through the Clean Foundation, Monet, to work through this project. It's also involved a ton of scientists, citizens, and volunteers. So many people have gotten involved.
In the short term, the town has been approved to use 2 methods of chemical control against HWA, injections and basal bark spray. The pesticides which have been approved are Imajet injections and Zytec the spray. These treatment options have been approved and have proven effective in other parts of the province, like the Tobiatic Wilderness area in southwestern Nova Scotia, Sporting Lake Nature Reserve in Digby County, Kejimkujik National Park, and the United Church Camp in Berwick. The spray, Zytec, is a cheaper option, but it can't be used within 7 meters of a waterway and is difficult to apply safely on extreme slopes, where the hemlock trees like to grow. The dosage of Zytec for hemlock is determined by the diameter of the tree at breast height, also known as DBH, and each hectare of the forest can only support a certain amount of the spray, so it will take multiple years to treat all of our hemlock trees. But Zytec can cause up to an 85% mortality of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid from 9 to 12 months after the application, and 100% mortality after 24 months. The treatment also lasts 4 to 7 years, so it's absolutely crucial that the treatment gets applied before the tree drops too many needles and becomes too thin for it to treat.
So what is the long-term solution here? Well, there's trials going on in Keji for the introduction of Leucobius beetle and other natural predators as a biological control agent. As long as this predator would be safe to introduce to our ecosystem, this would be much preferable to chemical applications, given the cost and tremendous effort required to manage chemical applications.
Yeah, there's some studies from the west coast of Canada that show that these predators only attack adelgids and ultimately prefer HWA and do not affect other insects. This would be a great option because the beetles can find HWA much easier than humans. And one of the big questions they need to answer is how well the Leucobius beetle will do over the winter, since where they're coming from in the west coast is a part of the continent that has much milder winters. This is the first time this kind of biological control has been used in Canada, though biocontrol with these two species has been effective in the United States for more than 20 years. It costs about $40 per beetle to ship them to the trial sites in Nova Scotia from BC, so it's a pretty big upfront cost paid for by the Nova Scotia and federal government. But the idea is to establish a population in the province that will sustain itself.
So what can a local trail appreciator do to help out against HWA? First of all, it's really important to slow the spread of the insect. If you have a lint roller, just lint roll yourself and your gear before and after leaving a park, especially the ravine. This is also a great way to catch ticks on your clothes and skin. It's really important to be aware of your travel and camping impact, especially if you're visiting an area with a lot of hemlocks. Like if you were visiting Keji and then heading back to Truro or Inniganish, you really want to make sure you lint roll and wipe down your gear before you take it back out to a park that doesn't have HWA. Do not transport firewood or hemlock products across counties in Nova Scotia. Wipe or brush off your boots after visiting the gorge or ravine. You can get involved in the project and volunteer by emailing conservation@kentville.ca. You can look into the protection of these trees on your own property.
And tell all your friends about Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. And don't let this species stop you from visiting and appreciating our awesome park spaces, as long as they're not closed due to pesticide applications. Every visit to the ravine is a chance to appreciate centuries of natural history and help ensure that they're here for centuries more. Thanks for listening to Roots and Roots, the podcast where we talk about your favorite trails and our favorite things about them. Today we learned about the Kentville Ravine, hemlock trees, and the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. This podcast was made through the Town of Kentville Recreation Department, and we'd like to thank the people who made it possible.
If you'd like to learn more and get involved with upcoming volunteering opportunities, visit kentville.ca/hemlock.
Tune in next time where we'll discuss another one of your favorite spots in Kentville. This has been Roots and Roots.